I have my notes. Let's do this. We're going to talk about the neuroscience and the neurobiology of fear, what happens inside our brain when we are afraid, what are the brain structures and the chemicals that are responsible for organizing the process of fear for us. So what is fear? Fear is an aversive reaction that we feel when we face a threat to our survival or our well-being. It is the primal expression of human emotions that arises in the subcortical parts of our brain. What is the subcortical part of our brain? If this is your brain, this is your cortex, and these are the subcortical parts of the brain. I need you to remember these terms. I'm going to put them here somewhere. So these are the subcortical parts of our brain that you cannot see from the outside, from within the skull. So let's go beneath the surface and see what exactly happens what happens inside our brain when we are afraid. First, physiologically, our eyes and our ears, our senses collect audiovisual information from our surrounding, and that visual information gets relayed by visual neural signaling pathways, and they sort of link up at the amygdala. I need you to remember this term. So while the amygdala is receiving all this information about this newly perceived threat, something else is happening side by side. All this information is going to the cortex as well. You're afraid, your eyes are telling your brain that there's a threat coming. The brain is telling the amygdala. The amygdala processes all that information. Your cortex receives this information because it is going to decide how you are going to respond to what's coming, how you're going to respond physiologically to the threat that you're perceiving. Are you going to fight or are you going to fly out? I'm sure you're very aware of what flight or fight is, but let me tell you actually what's happening, what fight or flight actually is. Your body is sort of preparing, stepping up to prepare you for what might be coming. This is because it needs to pump up your heart rate. It needs to heighten your senses. A lot of adrenaline is released into your bloodstream just in case you need to run with a lot of force or you need to lift a car. So that's what's happening during a flight or fight mechanism. Simultaneously, your body is also doing something else. It's stopping all the processes that are relatively non-urgent, for example, digestion, a song stuck in the back of your head, or like hiccups. So fear is a very physical process. It's a very complex thing that is going on in your brain, and a lot of prioritization is happening, a lot of calculations are happening. And if you had to point out a fear center of the brain, it would be the lateral amygdala, which is a part of the limbic system, which is located right beneath the medial temporal lobe. I'm going to put it here somewhere in the graphics that I will add to this video. So if we recorded your brain activity while you were afraid, what we would see in an fMRI is that your amygdala would be very active. And say, for example, something happened and you got in an accident, or due to some other reason your amygdala got damaged. Guess what would happen? You would not, if your amygdala got damaged, you would not be able to respond to threats or fear. You would not be able to process fear properly. You would not be able to react to fear properly. That's something that would happen. And this is such a powerful process that the chemicals that are released in your brain when you are afraid can actually give you the capacity to lift weight or exert force that is 10 or 20 times more than your body's capacity. That's how powerful this entire process is. It is. So let's see what are the chemicals that are involved. Like, what is this power rush that you get when you're afraid? So first, like I said, the amygdala registers your fear. Then the amygdala tells the pituitary gland that something is wrong. Your pituitary gland is your master gland. It handles your endocrine system, it handles all the hormones in your body. Then the pituitary gland executes the release of adrenaline. How does it do that? ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, gets released, and that triggers the release of cortisol, your stress hormone. Your blood is flooded with cortisol. That tells your adrenal glands to release adrenaline, and then that adrenaline filled blood is sent to your muscles. That gives you a lot of muscle tensions, and you tense up, and you prepare for what's coming. Several other brain regions, including the midbrain and the brainstem, are involved in the processing of fear, but there's some sort of disagreement among scientists as to whether fear operates within distinct circuits, or it's processed by the entire brain. There is still room for research as to how different parts of the brain interact with each other in the context of fear, but this is something that if you decide to study fear, you will come across this a lot, like what is context when it comes to understanding the neurobiology of fear. Fear can haunt us even after the threat is removed. So understanding context is very critical to establish a functional definition of fear. So threats that truly deeply impact us, that are personal, have the capacity to traumatize us. For example, if you are stuck on a highway with your family near a forest that is rumored to be haunted, that can be a very traumatizing experience. Now change the context. You go to a haunted house where you pay for the tickets, and you know that you're going to a haunted house that is, it's in an amusement park, and you're going there with your friends. So the context completely changes. That kind of fear gives you a sense of thrill. In that case, you're fully aware that you're not really in danger. In both these situations, your reactions might be same. A lot of your heart rate is increased, and you're jumpy, and you might shout. In the former, where you're stuck in the forest, the amygdala plays a predominant role. But when you voluntarily go to a thrill-seeking, fear-based activity, that is a very hippocampal process that's less emotional in terms of the capacity of getting exposed to some serious trauma. In both these scenarios, there's one thing that's common, that you undergo something that is known as associative learning or fear conditioning. Fear-based associative learning is often unpleasant and can make us anxious, but it's extremely important for our survival because it warns us about potential danger and prepares us for fast adaptive responses, like an instinct to catch a baby, which is found in parents. You see those videos on Instagram where you see that a father is just like putting his arm out almost while he's asleep, because he can sense that the baby is falling off the couch or something like that. Fear plays an extremely important role, not just in associative learning, but also in memory and decision making. It controls our voluntary and involuntary decisions. So many of your decisions today that you took unconsciously were driven out of fear. It's fascinating how it controls pretty much every aspect of our existence. Even our body functions, like the ones that we can't control, like dilating of our pupils, or heightened awareness of our surroundings, or muscle tension, or increased heart rate. We can't really voluntarily control all of this, but our fears can. So that's something that we really need to pay attention to. How much control does fear have on our bodies? So what is fear conditioning? Just like in classical Pavlovian conditioning, you ring a bell and the dog will wag its tail and associate the bell with the delivery of the food. Then eventually the dog will salivate at the sound of the bell, even if no food is presented. Something very similar happens with fear conditioning. With Pavlovian conditioning, you take something meaningless like a bell and then you pair it with something meaningful like getting fed. With fear conditioning, fear stimulus-based studies use electric shocks for the same purpose. Electric shocks are not as crazy as they sound. They're very safe. They do not have any long-term or short-term damage like you might assume. They're very quantifiable and measurable. They're quite reliably measurable. So when you ring a bell and you give an electric shock to a test subject, the test subject will learn to associate the bell with the fear of the electric shock, the distress that is caused by the electric shock. And once the conditioning happens, if you ring the bell, the same kind of fear will be experienced by the test subject, even if there is no electric shock. So this is a very important area of study. There's a lot of room for research here, and because a lot of anxiety disorders and psychological obstacles are based in, are rooted in our fear conditioning. Is fear the same as anxiety? There's some disagreement among scientists whether fear and anxiety should be classified as one or two distinct phenomena. Ethologists say that fear as a motivational state aroused by specific stimuli that give rise to defensive behavior or escape. So what does this mean? This means that from an ethological perspective, fear includes the biological functions of anxiety, which determine whether somebody will move towards will move towards a threat or move away from it. Like you can move towards something that you're afraid of while being very nervous, still comforting yourself with displacement activities like biting your nails while you're walking towards the exam hall. But some scientists oppose this, and they say that fear and anxiety are distinct from each other in their causes, in their etiology, in their response patterns and time courses. It's like they're both alert signals, but they prepare the body for two different things, two different reactions to a threat. Uncertainty around the true nature of a threat is a major contributor to the onset of anxiety, which is not always the case when it comes to fear. For example, if you're in a plane and an emergency landing is announced, it's very likely that you will experience a strong sense of fear and not generalized anxiety. Now take that experience and you take a flight after that and you fly through some turbulence. There it's quite possible that you might in your second flight after that crash landing experience, you take a flight again, you somehow manage to survive, you take a flight again, and in that flight it's quite possible you might experience generalized anxiety, which will be triggered by a fear memory. So why do we even need fear? It seems to be hindering everything that we do. Fear is an extremely powerful mode of learning, even outside of associative learning. It incentivizes us with survival when we listen to it. It is the fastest one out of all our instinctive tendencies. This is based in our evolutionary programming that defends us against predators. We have millions of years of programmings that teach us to be afraid of the dark or the unknown or wild or being attacked by wild beasts. I heard Dr. Anthony Lachinina say that if you, say for example, you missed an opportunity to mate, you can try again. You miss an opportunity to feed, you can look for food again. But if you miss a notification from fear, there is a potential of death, and that is irreversible. You don't get another chance. It's only been like a couple of 100 years that we can go to bed not worrying about being attacked by wild beasts or something. There's fear that is innate to all human beings, but they're personalized, customized fears that all of us have, that are very individual, that are very learned, that vary from person to person. Emotional and physical landscapes that we are too afraid to explore. But this is one of the reasons some people avoid fear and some people seek it. You'll be surprised that people that actually seek fear-inducing experiences, because fear also brings with itself the opportunity to experience courage. Some fear-inducing situations can traumatize us, and some can give us a sense of thrill. There are people who go skydiving. You might think that they're completely fearless, and what can you do in order to be fearless? Nothing. You cannot do anything to be completely fearless, because you're wired to experience fear. Unless you damage your amygdala somehow, as your life changes, your fears will also change. A person who might not be afraid of bungee jumping will have other fears. All of us have some sort of fears. What you can do is you can face your existing fears, and as your life will change, the quality and the nature of your fears will also change. But if you don't face your fears, the unnecessary avoidance of such distress-causing stimuli will lead to irrational fears, which when left unaddressed turn to phobias. You may think that this only applies to people who have irrational fear of pens or something, but that's not actually true. This applies to all of us. All of us have some sort of fear, and they're very subtle. They go very unnoticed in our everyday lives. The fear of new social situations, fear of communicating your needs, or fear of speaking up for yourself, fear of trusting others, and worst of all, fear of trusting yourself. Such exaggerated fear responses can affect your concentration and increase unhealthy levels of cortisol in your bloodstream. Research shows that anxiety disorders can be triggered by overstimulation of the amygdala. Panic disorders initiate if your body starts associating fight and flight with situations that are non-threatening. And flight or fight responses are not just when you visibly just freeze. It's many times they're very subtle and they're very unconscious, and where you avoid a party because you're worried about being asked about your career status, when you tell yourself that you just don't like going out. So these small denials makes our fears stronger. So what to do instead? First of all, admit to yourself that you're afraid of certain things. Then list out what those things are. It might be helpful to ponder upon where those fears originated from, but try not getting stuck there, because this is the starting of developing courage, not the end of it. Because your main focus should be on how to develop strength in the presence of your fear. People often classify fear as rational or irrational fears, but in my personal opinion, if you're afraid of something, avoiding it is a pretty rational response. How I like to define fear is avoiding this fear avoiding this fear helpful or harmful? Because being afraid of damaging your lungs and avoiding cigarettes as a result is a very good fear to have. So when you look at something that you're afraid of, you need to think, is avoiding this helping me or harming me? But being afraid of speaking up in public can really harm your chances at a new opportunity. There are lots of ways of managing our reactions to fear, which involve psychotherapy, anxiety medication, but the most important one amongst all of these is the conscious decision to experiment with the things that we are afraid of. One of the most popular forms of therapy that is used to deal with phobias and fear-based anxiety is exposure therapy. This is where a patient is gradually exposed to their context of fear or threat in a very controlled and regulated way, from a very objective and rational point of view, under the supervision of an expert. And this is actually quite a successful way to sort of overcome your fears and move towards a healthy functioning. A person can literally teach themselves to voluntarily approach things that they fear from an objective and rational perspective, because I was really afraid of coming in front of the camera. I'll happily give a seminar full of 300 people where they can ask me anything, but somehow I didn't realize how camera shy I was. So, it can be very tempting to think that being absolutely fearless is an ideal scenario, but it's actually a disadvantage if you're not able, not being able to feel fear would be a disadvantage, because it's a very, very helpful biological tool if we use it and understand it, if we understand it and use it well. So that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and if you actually managed to listen all the way till here, I'm going to put the link in the description. Please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Thank you so much. See you next week.